When a middle-aged bus driver notices a solitary child waiting in the pre-dawn chill each morning. It seems like nothing out of the ordinary, just another sleepy child starting their day. But there's something in the way she avoids eye contact, the way she stays silent, and how her sleeves seem deliberately long that begins to stir a quiet sense of unease within him. With each passing day, a subtle tension builds. There's more to this girl's silence than fatigue. Before we dive into the full story, take a moment to let us know where you're reading from, and if you believe that the smallest acts of kindness can change a life, go ahead and tap that like button and subscribe for more stories like this. Now, brace yourself for a journey of hidden truths, quiet courage, and the lengths one person will go to protect a child in need. Mr. Evans had driven his route, Bus 41, through the quiet grid of neighborhoods in Stratford for 17 steady years. He prided himself on punctuality, consistency, and the kind of no-nonsense discipline that made the mornings run smoothly. Most children, half awake and hugging backpacks stuffed with homework and old snacks, lumbered aboard without much thought for the man behind the wheel. He was part of the scenery, as routine as the squeaking bus doors or the scuffed vinyl seat. Yet there was comfort in his predictability. Kids learned he wouldn't scold unless they pushed too far, and parents respected the absence of fuss. Day in and day out, he maneuvered the same streets, hit the same stops, and fired up the heater at 6:45 on the dot when the autumn chills settled in. The truth was, he liked the quiet. He preferred that hush in the early hours, the way the sky still clung to darkness, the crisp air biting at the edges of dawn. He liked hearing the engine's low rumble and the scratch of tires against the curb. There were no big surprises in his world. The kids were used to him, and he was used to them. He knew which ones would bounce on the seats, which ones would chat until they lost their voices, and which ones would curl up against the window and drift off in minutes. It was a calm and unremarkable universe, until, slowly, a few details about one particular child began to unsettle him. Her name was Amy. She was 8 years old, in the 2nd grade at Maplewood Elementary, though she looked small enough to be in first. She had stringy hair that might have been blonde or light brown. Mr. Evans couldn't tell, because it was often hidden under the oversized hood of a gray sweatshirt. She always wore that sweatshirt, sleeves frayed at the cuffs, shoulders nearly engulfing her tiny frame. Each morning, she stood alone on the curb outside a squat, boxy house with chipped paint and an overgrown lawn. She never fidgeted or rocked back and forth. She simply waited, silent and still, no matter how cold the wind felt. Mr. Evans' first real note of concern sprouted in mid-November. The temperatures dipped earlier than usual that year, leading to a thin frost along the rooftops before sunrise. He spotted Amy on the sidewalk with no gloves, no scarf, barely any protection beyond that worn-out hoodie. But she didn't complain. She never did. She just climbed on board, nodded at him without making eye contact, and slipped to the far back seat, where she curled up and fell asleep almost instantly. She'd stay that way for most of the ride, waking only when the bus rumbled into the parking lot at Maplewood Elementary. At first, he chalked it up to a tired kid, or maybe parents with weird work schedules. As a bus driver, he had seen plenty of families who barely had time to feed their kids breakfast, let alone pick out suitable clothes for them. Still, something about Amy's posture, her absolute stillness, made him uneasy. Teachers had terms for kids like her: withdrawn, introverted, possibly depressed. But Mr. Evans had come to recognize a different category over the years: children who carried burdens no one else saw. Children whose quiet was less a personality trait and more a survival mechanism. The day his concern solidified was early December. The roads were dusted with snow and the sky was still a deep slate gray when he pulled up at 6:35 a.m. She was there, as always, standing next to a cracked sidewalk on a patch of dead, frost-coated grass. He watched her shoulders. They were oddly rigid, as though she was bracing herself for a blow. When she climbed the steps, she hesitated, wincing as she lifted her right leg. He asked if she was okay, but she didn't speak, just mumbled something that might have been an apology. She took her usual seat and didn't curl up this time. Instead, she remained upright, shoulders tight. About 15 minutes later, Mr. Evans glanced in the rearview mirror and noticed her nodding off. Her hood drooped slightly, and the frayed sleeve on her left arm slipped an inch. It revealed a red mark, not just a rash, but an angry, swollen welt that looked raw and painful. He almost jerked the wheel at the sight. It wasn't shaped like any bruise he had seen. It looked more like a burn. He felt a jolt of alarm. This was beyond a neglected child's unwashed clothes or a lack of a proper winter coat. This was an injury, something that clearly hurt her. At the stop in front of the school, he caught her eye as she hurried down the aisle. "Amy," he asked, in a voice he tried to keep gentle. She paused, her face pale, eyes wide. "You okay?" She shrugged and whispered, "I like the bus because the heater is soft. The one at home burns." Then she slipped off without another word. He reported it that very afternoon. He went straight to the front office at Maplewood, explained to the secretary what he had seen, and filled out a formal concern form. The counselor thanked him for being vigilant. They said they'd follow up with the home. The words sounded official and well-meaning, and for a moment Mr. Evans felt relief. He pictured social workers stepping in, ensuring the child had proper care. He pictured the school nurse or a CPS agent interviewing Amy in a bright, friendly room. That night, he went to bed thinking he'd done his part. But the next morning, Amy was there. Same time, same place, same hoodie. Nothing had changed. No one seemed to have stepped in, or if they did, it hadn't made a difference. 2 days turned into 3, then a week. And there she was, every morning, always alone, always silent. If the school had checked on her, it clearly hadn't resolved the situation. Mr. Evans found himself watching her more closely, noticing details he'd overlooked before: the faint tremble in her hands when she climbed the stairs, the way she sometimes held herself as if her ribs ached. It got under his skin in a way he couldn't shake. He felt an unsettling guilt every time he drove away from the school, wondering if she was headed to a safe place at the end of the day, or if she'd go back to that house with the chipped paint and overgrown yard, and whatever was inside that caused her burns and bruises. He broke a personal rule one Friday afternoon. He decided to investigate on his own, something he knew was risky. He had no legal authority to snoop around someone's property. Still, the image of that welt on her arm haunted him. After dropping off the last kid at Maplewood, he circled back to her street and parked discreetly across from the house. It was 3 p.m. The school day ended at 3:15, so he waited, eyes on the front door. He half expected to see Amy shuffle up the front step. Instead, at 3:29, she appeared from behind the garage. She walked around the side, never once going near the front door. There was a sagging chain-link fence, a battered trash bin, and beyond that, a detached structure that might have once been a regular garage. She vanished behind it. Mr. Evans' heart pounded. Without overthinking, he got out of his truck and walked across the street, glancing around to make sure no neighbors were watching. He crept along the fence, his breath visible in the cold air. The backyard was bleak. Patches of brown grass, piles of old cardboard, a few cinder blocks stacked haphazardly. He followed the direction she had gone, stepping carefully to avoid drawing attention. Behind the garage stood a metal storage unit, the kind people rent at self-storage facilities. It was a dull, faded blue with small dents along the sides. The door wasn't locked. It was cracked open an inch. He heard nothing from inside, no voices or movement. He edged closer, pulse hammering in his temples. He gently nudged the door, and it slid open enough for him to see the makeshift interior. Tattered blankets on the floor, an old gym mat, a small space heater plugged into a tangled extension cord, and a plastic bin with clothes and cans of soup. In the corner, he saw Amy. She was curled up, knees drawn to her chest. When she noticed him, her eyes flared wide with panic. "Please don't tell," she murmured. She says I bring bugs. He realized in that moment that this was where the child lived. Not just a hideout or a play space. This was her bedroom. The damp chill of the metal walls seeped into him. "Who says that?" he asked softly. "My foster mom. She says I have bugs in my skin from my real mom. She makes me sleep here so I don't get the house dirty." Mr. Evans felt a surge of rage, heartbreak, and sheer helplessness coil inside him like a spring ready to snap. But he forced himself to keep his voice calm. "Why does she burn you?" Amy's eyes flicked away. "She says the heater at home is meant to burn the bad things out." He swallowed hard, stepping back to avoid making her feel cornered. "I'm so sorry," he whispered. "I'll fix this." He left quickly, not wanting to alert the foster mother. That night, he called a retired child services investigator he'd known for years, someone who understood the system from the inside out. She advised him how to proceed, telling him that some local offices were overburdened, that sometimes cases fell through the cracks. She gave him the contact for a regional supervisor who could cut through bureaucracy. First, he installed a dash cam in his bus. It was a small device, perfectly legal for safety reasons. He angled it so it captured the steps where Amy boarded. For 3 days, he recorded her shaky climb into the bus, the way she braced her arms around her torso as though her whole body hurt. He recorded her slipping a small tattered pillow under her arm each morning. The video showed her winces, the way she handled the bus seats with caution, as if contact itself might cause pain. He emailed the footage to the regional CPS contact, along with a detailed message. The burn marks, the space heater comment, the metal storage unit behind the garage. He asked for help. He demanded it, in fact, and then he waited. 48 hours later, Amy was removed from that home. Word reached him through the school's administration. They told him a black car arrived with 2 agents, and after a short conversation, Amy walked out with them. By the next day, the entire neighborhood seemed to buzz with the news that the foster mother had been taken away in handcuffs. He never learned all the details firsthand, but rumors circulated that the woman believed in some bizarre spiritual concept of evil residue in a child's blood. She thought that heat, painful, scalding heat, was the only way to cleanse Amy. She believed Amy was cursed by her biological mother's sins. And the system, so overloaded with cases, had missed the red flags. The private agency that placed Amy was understaffed. The local CPS was underfunded. And the child had slipped through the cracks. When Mr. Evans found out she was safe, he quietly returned to his normal routine. He told no one of his involvement, or that he'd done the detective work that forced the system's hand. He just kept driving the bus, picking up children who saw him as a quiet fixture of their daily routine. But a few weeks later, on a bitterly cold Monday, he found a piece of construction paper tucked into the back seat where Amy once slept. On it was a drawing of a yellow school bus with a little girl waving. There was a short message in big, clumsy letters. "This heater never hurt me." He kept that note, sliding it into the glove compartment near a snapshot of his own grandchildren. It reminded him that the difference between suffering in silence and escaping a nightmare can hinge on a single person who cares enough to see what's really there. Yet that was only the beginning of what would become the most harrowing winter he ever lived through. Because sometimes, shining a light on one horrible situation reveals a darkness that runs deeper, snaking through the entire community. And even when a child is rescued from immediate harm, the scars, and the ripple effect of that harm, can ignite bigger fires than anyone ever anticipated. Over the next few weeks, winter descended on Stratford with an unforgiving chill. By mid-January, the temperature rarely rose above freezing, and the early mornings were as dark as midnight. Mr. Evans continued his bus route in the same steady fashion, but his mind was never fully at ease. He thought of Amy often, wondering where she ended up. He hoped that wherever she was, she found warmth and safety. He carried on, telling himself that he had done his part. But the world around him changed in subtle ways he couldn't ignore. At the middle school down the road from Maplewood, rumors spread about another child with suspicious bruises. At the high school, a quiet freshman turned up in the nurse's office multiple times with cuts and welts. Mr. Evans heard these murmurs through the grapevine of bus drivers, custodians, and cafeteria workers who formed the backbone of local school gossip. Normally, such stories might have been brushed aside as typical teenage scuffles or routine accident. Yet after Amy, he found himself tuning in more carefully. The retired investigator he had called, a woman named Myra, visited him on a Friday afternoon when the bus lot was nearly empty. She was in her 60s, with kind eyes and a posture that radiated a no-nonsense authority. She sipped coffee from a thermos as they stood near the chain-link fence that bordered the depot. The wind rattled the fence, and she spoke with her back to it, as though mindful of possible eavesdroppers. There have been more reports. Not all from Maplewood, mind you. Some from the private placement agencies, some from families fostering older kids. But the pattern is disturbing, Myra said quietly, glancing at him over the rim of her thermos. He forced himself not to look too shocked. How many kids are we talking about? It's hard to pin down officially. The records don't connect them all. Different offices, different caseworkers. But from what I can piece together, there might be half a dozen or more who've come forward. Some with burns, some with other injuries. A lot of them are in the foster system. He recalled Amy's wide, fearful eyes and the burn on her arm. Do you think it's an organized group? Some religious or cult-like practice? Myra shrugged, her eyes scanning the bus lot. Could be. Or it might just be that sometimes, in these small towns, a bad idea spreads quietly. Certain foster parents might share beliefs that justify abuse. They might even see it as a righteous act, cleansing the child. Could be tied to that woman who was arrested. She might have had friends or associates who believed the same nonsense. A swirl of anger and helplessness churned in Mr. Evans' gut. I don't understand how this can go on without someone stepping in. Myra's mouth thinned into a line. CPS is overwhelmed. So are the private agencies. Sometimes by the time they investigate, the kids are too scared to talk, or the evidence is gone, or the foster parents move the child to another location. It's a mess. He felt a pang of guilt gnaw at him again. He had done the right thing for Amy, but the problem was bigger than one child. How can I help? Myra studied him for a moment, as though measuring his resolve. You're on the front lines, whether you like it or not. You see these kids every day. If you notice something off, anything, you let me know directly. You keep documenting, just like you did with Amy. I'll do my best to cut through red tape. But be careful. If there's a group involved, they might not appreciate you snooping. He nodded. I'm not a detective, Myra. No. But you're someone who cares. That's more than most. Just be smart about it. They parted ways, and Mr. Evans spent that weekend in a haze of worry. He combed through his mental log of the kids on his bus, trying to recall any signs he might have overlooked. But Amy had been the only one who stood out as overtly harmed. The rest seemed okay, at least outwardly. Yet he couldn't shake the feeling that a dark undercurrent was flowing just beneath the surface of his sleepy town. The following Monday, he started paying closer attention. He'd greet each student by name as they boarded, carefully noting their posture, their expressions, any bruises or flinches. Little by little, he saw subtle changes. A fourth grader named Miranda, who usually chatted nonstop about her cat, grew silent and hunched over her backpack. A fifth grader, Troy, appeared with a bruise under his eye, which he claimed came from slipping on ice. Mr. Evans' instincts prickled. Then one morning, a child from another block, Devin, boarded the bus limping. Devin brushed it off, saying he fell off his bike, but something about his explanation felt rehearsed. Each time Mr. Evans felt uncertain, he remembered Amy's burn and the way she'd said so little. He debated what to do. On the one hand, false accusations could ruin families. On the other, silence could leave children at risk. He decided to keep discreet notes, times, dates, any injuries. He planned to share them with Myra if a pattern emerged. By early February, he had scribbled over a dozen entries in a small notebook he kept tucked under his seat. Nothing conclusive, just a worrying number of minor injuries and odd behaviors. One dark morning, as the snow fell in light flakes that glittered under the street lamps, Troy stopped at the front of the bus before heading to his seat. His eyes were rimmed with red, and he looked like he hadn't slept. "Mr. Evans?" Troy asked quietly. "Did you, see Amy lately?" It threw him off guard. He forced himself to reply calmly. "Not for a while. She's not riding the bus anymore. Is she okay?" The boy's voice quivered, like he was terrified of the answer. Mr. Evans swallowed hard, choosing his words. "She's in a safer place now." Troy exhaled like he'd been holding his breath forever. Then he hurried to sit down. Mr. Evans stared at the rearview mirror, wondering what Troy's connection to Amy was. They weren't in the same grade. Perhaps they had shared a classroom the year before, or maybe they just knew each other from the neighborhood. Whatever the reason, Troy looked genuinely relieved that Amy was safe. It made Mr. Evans wonder if Troy himself had reason to fear the same environment. That day, after finishing his route, Mr. Evans drove to the address Myra had provided for the regional CPS office. The building was a squat structure of concrete and glass with a salt-crusted parking lot. He walked inside, cradling his notebook, determined to share what he'd gathered. But at the reception desk, he was told Myra wasn't in. The woman behind the desk gave him a polite smile and a phone number to call. He left feeling uneasy. He had pictured a straightforward process, of handing over the notes and having them taken seriously. Instead, he found himself caught in a labyrinth of unavailable staff and endless scheduling. The phone number led him to a voicemail box. He left a detailed message, explaining who he was, referencing Amy's case, and stating that he had more concerns. He never got a return call. Days blurred into weeks. Mr. Evans felt his frustration mounting. Twice more, he tried to contact Myra directly, but she wasn't picking up. He wondered if she'd traveled out of town or if something else was going on. Meanwhile, the kids kept riding his bus, and he watched them carefully, heart heavy with the sense of impending crisis. He chatted with a few teachers he knew at Maplewood, carefully prodding for information, but all anyone could say was that the system was slow, that the winter was particularly harsh, that everyone was scrambling to keep up with the needs of the children. No one seemed to connect the dots the way he and Myra had. Eventually, a new name started circulating in hushed tones: Ms. Morrow. She ran a foster home on the outskirts of Stratford. She was tall, strict, and deeply religious, known for a no-nonsense demeanor that some said bordered on fanatic. Kids placed with her rarely stayed more than a few months, after which they would be moved elsewhere. Some parents at Maplewood whispered about her methods of discipline, though no formal complaints seemed to stick. Mr. Evans overheard the cafeteria ladies discussing how Ms. Morrow wouldn't let her foster children eat lunch at school, insisting on packing them a special meal. Rumor had it she was part of a small but zealous church group that believed in exorcisms for troubled youth. He recalled that Amy's caretaker had also been described as devout, though in a twisted, harmful way. One freezing Tuesday morning, Ms. Morrow boarded the bus with a new foster child. It was highly unusual for a foster parent to escort a child onto the bus. Most just watched from the curb. She was tall, with iron-gray hair pulled into a tight bun, her eyes the color of slate, her lips pressed in a permanent scowl. The child with her was a boy of about 10, with large eyes that darted nervously around. He kept his arms crossed over his chest, as though hugging himself. "This is David," Ms. Morrow said, her voice clipped. "He'll be riding with you from now on." Mr. Evans offered a neutral smile. "Welcome, David." The boy didn't respond. His gaze flicked to Ms. Morrow's face, then back to the floor. Something about that look made Mr. Evans' spine prickle. Ms. Morrow gave him a curt nod and stepped off the bus without saying goodbye to David. The boy remained standing in the aisle until Mr. Evans gently encouraged him to pick a seat. David chose the front row on the right near the window. He sat bolt upright, his small hands shaking. During the ride, Mr. Evans tried to make light conversation, but David only mumbled one-word answers, glancing nervously at the other kids. When they arrived at school, David lingered until everyone else disembarked, then hurried off without looking back. That afternoon, after the dismissal bell rang, David was the last to climb aboard again. Mr. Evans noticed that David winced when he hoisted himself up the step. "You all right?" Mr. Evans asked, lowering his voice so no one else could hear. David nodded but said nothing. The bus rolled off, depositing children at stops along the route. Finally, only David remained. His stop was at the edge of a rural stretch near Ms. Morrow's property, a patch of land that looked more like a small farm. When the bus came to a halt at the designated spot, David paused in the aisle. Do you know Amy?" he whispered. Mr. Evans' heart jolted. "Yes," he replied softly. "I do." David's lip trembled. "She said the bus driver would help me." Before Mr. Evans could speak, Ms. Morrow emerged from behind a fence and waved impatiently for David to get off. The boy hurried down the steps and into her presence. She offered Mr. Evans a stern glance, then turned away, steering David by the shoulder toward the house. Mr. Evans watched them vanish behind a row of bare trees. The pit in his stomach felt like it might swallow him whole. Somehow, Amy's story and Ms. Morrow's brood were linked. He remembered how Amy's caretaker had believed in spiritual contamination, in burning away demons. Were Ms. Morrow's beliefs any different? He parked the bus back at the depot, then spent an hour in his personal truck, driving around Ms. Morrow's neighborhood. He saw her property, a squat farmhouse with a wraparound porch, curtains drawn tight. In the side yard was a small barn with boarded-up windows, and beyond that, an empty field dotted with dead cornstalks. No lights shone from the barn, and the yard was still and silent in the fading daylight. He thought about approaching, but caution held him back. Instead, he made a note of everything he observed and resolved to call Myra again that night. To his relief, Myra picked up on the second ring. Her voice sounded rushed. "I've been out of town. Had a family emergency. What's going on?" He relayed the new developments: Ms. Morrow, the boy named David, the rumored link to some extremist group. Myra listened intently. "I've heard that name before," she said. "Morrow's had half a dozen fosters in the last year, and they've all transferred out. I know the local CPS had at least one complaint about her, but nothing ever stuck." Mr. Evans' pulse quickened. "What do we do?" "Keep an eye on David," Myra replied. "Document anything suspicious. If the child confides in you, gently encourage him to talk to the school counselor. I'll see what I can pull together on my end." They hung up, and Mr. Evans found himself pacing his living room, a tension headache throbbing behind his eyes. Winter nights in Stratford were long and cold, and his house felt hollow. A widower for 3 years, he'd grown used to the loneliness, but tonight it pressed on him more keenly, a reminder that he had no one to share the weight of this worry with. Over the next week, David continued to ride the bus. He rarely spoke, but each day Mr. Evans greeted him, offered small words of encouragement. "You doing okay? How was your day?" David usually responded with a tight nod. By Thursday, the bruises became noticeable, a faint bluish shadow around his left wrist, a dark blot on his forearm. Mr. Evans' heart sank when he realized David was trying to hide them, keeping his arms folded or stuffed in his pockets. The bus driver pulled him aside at school drop-off, quietly suggesting David talk to the counselor. The boy stared at his feet and shook his head, then darted off. That afternoon, Mr. Evans called Myra again, leaving a message about the bruises. He considered filing another official concern at Maplewood the way he had for Amy, but David didn't attend Maplewood. He went to a different elementary school that the bus route served. At the same time, he wasn't sure if the principal there would take it seriously, or if Ms. Morrow had enough influence to brush it off. On Friday morning, as the bus was rumbling through its route, David climbed aboard with a limp. A wave of anger and helplessness coursed through Mr. Evans. He had to do something. But what? He couldn't just barge onto Ms. Morrow's property. He couldn't forcibly remove David from the bus and take him to the authorities. He knew from Amy's case that the official steps were slow and time was ticking. During the midday lull, he drove to Ms. Morrow's neighborhood again. This time, he parked a few blocks away and walked, bracing himself against the wind. He passed properties with old barns, rusted cars in driveways, and barking dogs. When he reached Ms. Morrow's farmhouse, he took a vantage point behind a cluster of pine trees. Through his binoculars, ones he used sporadically for birdwatching, he spotted Ms. Morrow trudging around the side yard with a shovel, presumably clearing a path. He waited an hour but saw no sign of David. He started to wonder if Ms. Morrow kept him inside all day, or if he was locked somewhere else. He felt a stab of guilt, recalling how Amy had been banished to the metal storage unit. Was Ms. Morrow doing something similar? He left before Ms. Morrow could notice him. That evening, he returned with the bus to drop David off. The boy descended the steps, but before he could scurry away, Mr. Evans called after him. "David, wait a second." David paused, fear flickering across his face. He threw a look toward the house, as if worried Ms. Morrow would see. "She can't hear us," Mr. Evans said gently, though he wasn't entirely sure. "You need help, son." David swallowed, tears gathering at the corners of his eyes. "I can handle it," he whispered. "Amy said you helped her. But if I talk, Ms. Morrow said she'll tell everyone I'm a liar. She says no one will believe me." Mr. Evans' chest tightened. "That's not true. I'll believe you. And so will others, if you speak up." David shook his head, stepping back onto the gravel. "Ms. Morrow says God punishes liars." Then he turned and bolted toward the house, leaving Mr. Evans feeling as though the wind had been knocked out of him. He filed an official concern anyway, calling David's school and describing the bruises, the limp, and the child's fearful demeanor. The administrator on the phone sounded sympathetic, but non-committal. They took his statement and said they'd look into it. A day passed. Then another. The morning rides continued, and David's condition didn't visibly improve. Occasionally, Mr. Evans spotted new bruises peeking from under the boy's sleeves. Each time, he updated his log, took discrete photos of the bus security footage, and sent them to Myra via email. One night, after the bus driver had drifted to sleep, the shrill ring of his phone startled him awake. He lunged for it, heart pounding. It was Myra. When he answered, she sounded breathless. "Got some news," she said. "Not sure if it's good or bad yet." He rubbed his eyes. The clock read 11:42 p.m. "I'm listening. There's a bigger investigation going on. Something beyond Ms. Morrow. State level. They're looking into multiple foster families accused of extreme disciplinary practices. Some call it exorcism, some call it cleansing, but it's basically abuse. The reason you're not hearing back from local CPS is because there's a hush-hush directive to keep these complaints from getting out until they have enough evidence to make mass arrests." Mr. Evans felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. So David is in danger. They're trying to move fast. But the system is complicated. Judges, warrants, you know the drill. The fear is that if these families find out about the investigation, they'll vanish. Or they'll destroy evidence. And meanwhile, the kids suffer, he said grimly. Myra's voice softened. "I'm sorry, Evans. I wish there was a quicker way. Keep your eyes open and your notes detailed. If Ms. Morrow does anything drastic, we might be able to expedite removal. But be cautious. If she senses you're onto her, she could escalate." He hung up, a swirl of dread gripping him as he tried to settle back to sleep. He remembered Amy's whispered words about a heater that burned. The next day, He resolved to find a way to speak to David without Ms. Morrow's interference. That Friday, he seized an opportunity. The school had an early dismissal for a teacher conference, meaning the bus schedules shifted. David came aboard at noon, the only child from his route on that run. Mr. Evans drove toward Ms. Morrow's farm, but halfway there, the engine rattled ominously. Seizing the moment, he deliberately pulled over onto a wide shoulder. He stepped off the bus and pretended to check the engine, then poked his head back in. "David, come here a moment." David approached hesitantly, eyes darting around. Mr. Evans motioned for him to step off the bus and stand with him by the open hood. The highway was mostly empty, just a few cars passing every couple of minutes. The winter sun gleamed on the snowbanks, making the scene feel stark and exposed. "David," Mr. Evans said softly, "if there's something you want to tell me about Ms. Morrow, now's the time. Nobody else can hear us." For a moment David clammed up. Then, in a trembling voice, he whispered, "I'm not allowed to sit on the furniture. I can't eat with the others. She says I need purification. She locks me in the barn if I make noise at night." Mr. Evans suppressed a shudder of rage. "Have you told your caseworker?" David shook his head fiercely. "Ms. Morrow says if I tell, they'll send me to a worse place. She says at least she cares about my soul." A wave of helplessness crashed over Mr. Evans. "That's not true," he said firmly. "Nobody has a right to hurt you, David." David swallowed. "Amy told me you stopped her foster mom from burning her. She said you made them listen. But Ms. Morrow is different. She has friends who think the same way. They come over sometimes and talk about the devil and spirits in children." Mr. Evans felt a cold sweat break out on his forehead. This was bigger than just one twisted caretaker. "You're going to be okay, David," he managed, though he didn't entirely believe his own words. "Stay strong. Keep your head down if you have to. But know that I'm working to help you. There are people who want to stop this." David's lips trembled. "She's planning something tonight," he added suddenly, voice cracking. "She said she's going to drive the evil out for good. I'm scared." Mr. Evans' heart pounded in his chest. "What exactly did she say?" David shook his head, tears spilling down his cheeks. "I don't know. She says I have to undergo a ritual. She's making me fast. I haven't eaten since yesterday." Mr. Evans felt adrenaline surge through him. This was urgent. "David," he said, "listen to me. You need to tell someone at school before you go home. Tell a teacher or the nurse or the principal, anyone who can keep you there." David just shook his head again. "She'll find me. She always does." A deep sense of foreboding settled over Mr. Evans. "Let me try something," he said. He fished his phone out of his pocket and called Myra. But it went to voicemail. He tried the regional CPS office again, voicemail. He tried the local police non-emergency line, praying someone would take him seriously. The dispatcher sounded impatient, directing him to file a report with Child Protective Services. "I'm telling you this is an emergency," he insisted. But the dispatcher didn't waver. "Sir, if the child is not in immediate physical danger right now, our protocol is to direct you to CPS." He wanted to scream that the child was indeed in immediate danger, but the line clicked off. He ended the call, shaking with frustration. "David," he said, turning to the boy, "I can't force you to do anything, but please, if Ms. Morrow threatens you or you feel unsafe tonight, you call 911. Can you do that?" David looked down. "I don't have a phone." Mr. Evans wanted to cry. The system's cracks were so wide, children were simply slipping through them every day. He rummaged in his jacket pocket, finding a small piece of paper and a pen. He scribbled his own phone number on it. "Hide this," he instructed. "If you can get to a phone, any phone, you call me." "Okay." David took the paper, nodding slowly. Then Mr. Evans pretended to finish tinkering with the engine, guiding David back onto the bus. They drove the remaining miles in silence, until Ms. Morrow's property came into view. She stood at the gate, arms crossed over her chest, glaring like she suspected something was amiss. David stepped off the bus and trudged toward her. She grabbed him by the shoulder, speaking words Mr. Evans couldn't hear. Then she turned her gaze on the bus driver, offering a tight, humorless smile before steering David into the house. Mr. Evans spent the rest of the afternoon in a fugue of anxiety. He tried calling Myra again, but her phone still went to voicemail. He considered driving to the local police station, but what could he say that he hadn't already? He had no concrete evidence, just the word of a frightened 10-year-old. That night, he sat by his phone, numb with worry. No call came. The following Monday, David didn't board the bus. Mr. Evans' heart hammered as he waited at Ms. Morrow's stop, snow swirling around the headlights in ghostly spirals. No David. The front door of the farmhouse remained shut. He lingered longer than usual, until he risked delaying other pickups. Finally, he had to go. Perhaps David was sick. Or worse. That afternoon, David was still absent. On Tuesday, the same. By Wednesday, Mr. Evans couldn't stand it. He made a special trip to the farmhouse after his morning route. He knocked on the door, bracing himself for a confrontation. Ms. Morrow opened it just enough to peer out, her expression frigid. A faint smell of antiseptic wafted from inside. "Where's David?" Mr. Evans asked, trying to keep his voice calm. She offered a thin smile. "He's no longer under my care. He's been relocated." Mr. Evans' stomach lurched. "Relocated where?" "That's private information, Mr. Evans." She started to close the door. He put his foot gently against the threshold. "Is he safe?" She narrowed her eyes. "Take your foot away. Now." He hesitated, but her glare was unwavering. Slowly, he withdrew his foot. She shut the door in his face. He stood on the porch, breath visible in the cold air, heart pounding with anger and dread. He had no idea where David was, or if the boy was even alive. Ms. Morrow's abrupt mention of relocation sounded far too convenient. He left, uncertain of his next move. That evening, he hammered Myra's phone again, but she remained unreachable. Days turned into a week. David did not reappear. The bus felt emptier without him, and Mr. Evans found his gaze drifting to the front seat, expecting to see the boy's frightened eyes. In desperation, he filed another formal concern through the state's online portal, describing David's disappearance in detail and referencing Ms. Morrow's suspected abuse. He got an automated response: "Your submission has been received." He knew better than to expect immediate result. On a frigid Sunday night, the phone rang. He snatched it up, hoping it was Myra. It wasn't. It was a blocked number. He answered anyway. A young voice whispered on the other end. "It's David." Mr. Evans nearly dropped the phone. Relief and terror battled inside him. "Oh, thank God," he said, breath hitching. "Where are you? Are you safe?" A muffled sniff. "I don't know where I am," David replied, voice wavering. "It's a different house. Near a big warehouse. She gave me to someone else. They say I'm being punished for talking too much." Mr. Evans' blood ran cold. "Who has you now?" "It's a man. I haven't seen him much, but he talks about Ms. Morrow sometimes. He says he's finishing what she started. Please help me." Mr. Evans tried to keep his voice level. Okay. Listen to me, look around. Do you see any signs? Any names? Anything that can tell me where you are?" David's voice shook. "I'm locked in a room. There's a window, but it's boarded up. I can see a fence outside, and beyond that, a building with a sign that says Harding Textile Mill. I think we might be near one of the older industrial areas." Mr. Evans racked his memory. Harding Textile Mill had been defunct for years, near the southwestern edge of town. The area was mostly deserted. "Stay calm," he murmured, forcing himself not to panic. "I'm going to call the police right now. Don't hang up, okay?" A sudden noise crackled on the line. He heard what sounded like a door creaking open. David gasped. Then the line went dead. Mr. Evans stood frozen, phone in hand, mind reeling. He had a location, or at least a clue. He dialed 911 immediately, explaining the urgent situation. A child is being held in some building near the old Harding textile mill, he stressed. The operator took his information, sounding skeptical. Sir, how did the child contact you? Mr. Evans provided a clipped explanation. We'll send a patrol to check it out, the operator said in that controlled tone. He demanded to speak to the responding officers, but the operator wouldn't promise direct communication. He was left to wait. Minutes felt like hours. Eventually, unable to stand still, he grabbed his coat and keys, ignoring the trembling in his hands. Perhaps it was foolish, but he couldn't just pace his living room while David was in danger. He had to be sure the police took this seriously. With the phone pressed to his ear, still on hold with dispatch, he slipped into his truck and drove into the icy night, heading for the old industrial district. The roads were slick, and the darkness seemed to swallow the beams of his headlights. Every nerve in his body throbbed with tension. When he arrived, the place was desolate. Rows of abandoned warehouses stretched under flickering streetlights. The Harding textile mill sign loomed above a rusted chain-link fence. Snowdrifts piled high against loading dock. He saw no sign of any patrol cars. No sign of movement at all. The operator's voice finally crackled back on the line. Officers are en route, sir. Please remain in a safe location. He cut the call without replying, scanning the area. Could David be in one of these crumbling buildings? Suddenly, he noticed a faint glow in an upper window of a structure adjacent to the mill. The building was smaller, possibly an office or storage facility. The light flickered like a candle or a weak lamp. Gathering his courage, he eased his truck forward, headlights off, not wanting to alert anyone inside. He parked a short distance away and climbed out. The air felt brutally cold against his cheek. Each crunch of his boots on the snow sent anxiety twisting in his stomach. He moved toward the building, searching for a vantage point. The windows were boarded up from the inside. The door looked old and half-rotted, but it had a sturdy padlock on it. He circled the perimeter, heart hammering. Around the back, there was a narrow alley strewn with broken pallets and trash. A side door appeared slightly ajar, as if someone had forgotten to latch it properly. He crept toward it, pausing to listen. He could hear voices, indistinct but angry. One of them was a man, low and menacing. Another voice was higher-pitched. Maybe David's, though Mr. Evans couldn't be sure. He slipped closer, careful not to crunch the loose gravel. His heart thudded in his ears, and a voice in his head screamed that he should wait for the police. But David needed help. Now. He had no weapon, no plan, just raw determination, fueled by fear. A sudden crash from inside made him jump. Someone yelled, "You little demon!" followed by a sharp cry. That settled it. He pushed the door open and stepped into a dim hallway that smelled of mildew and dust. Flickering fluorescent bulbs cast sickly light on the stained floor. A single door stood at the far end, partially open. Through it, he could see the glow of a lamp and a shifting shadow. With trembling steps, he approached. His mind spun with adrenaline, but he forced himself to keep moving. Just as he reached the doorway, he heard a muffled sob. Peering around the corner, he saw a cluttered room filled with boxes, old furniture, and a single lamp on a rickety table. A tall, thin man with wiry hair was gripping a wooden rod, standing over a small figure huddled on the floor. The figure had a blanket draped around him. Mr. Evans' heart seized. It was David. The man hissed, "Filthy spirit," lifting the rod as if to strike again. David's face was streaked with tears. He was whimpering, one arm raised to shield himself. Mr. Evans didn't think. He lunged forward, grabbing the man's arm. "Stop," he roared. The man spun around, eyes wild. They struggled briefly, the wooden rod clattering to the floor. The man managed to shove Mr. Evans against a stack of boxes. Pain exploded in his ribs. He gasped, scrambling to keep the man from picking up the rod again. David, eyes wide with shock, scrambled out of the man's reach. He staggered toward Mr. Evans, as though unsure whether to run or help. In a desperate burst, Mr. Evans kicked a nearby crate toward the man, knocking him off balance. The man stumbled, cursing. That gave Mr. Evans enough time to grab David's hand. "Run!" he yelled. They sprinted out of the room, down the dim hallway, and through the side door. The bitter cold assaulted them as soon as they stepped into the night air. Behind them, the man bellowed in rage, his footsteps thudding on the floor. Mr. Evans didn't let go of David's hand as they wove around crates and pallets, panting, plumes of white breath trailing behind them. In the distance, faint sirens began to rise. Headlights flared across the lot, police cruisers at last. Mr. Evans pulled David toward the beams of those lights, relief mixing with fear that the man might catch them first. They reached the front fence just as two officers stepped out of their vehicle, guns drawn. Mr. Evans raised his free hand, shouting, "He's inside, he's armed. The boy's hurt." The officers rushed forward, ordering them to stand aside. Another set of headlights approached. "Back up." Within minutes, the building was surrounded. Flashlights cut through the darkness. Mr. Evans stood with David, wrapping his coat around the trembling child's shoulders. David's face was pale, and he leaned against Mr. Evans, too exhausted to speak. Another squad car arrived, paramedics in tow. They whisked David onto a stretcher to check his injuries while Mr. Evans watched, tears freezing on his cheek. Officers dragged the wiry man out in handcuffs, shouting about devils and demons as they shoved him into a squad car. He ranted about Ms. Morrow, about purifying children, about how they were all servants of evil. The police seemed unsure how to handle such a delusional tirade. One officer approached Mr. Evans, taking a statement. With shaky breaths, Mr. Evans recounted the phone call, the deserted building, how he'd found the side door open. Soon, the paramedics let Mr. Evans sit with David in the back of the ambulance, at least until they had to transport him for further care. David gripped Mr. Evans' hand, eyes filled with overwhelming relief. "Thank you," the boy whispered, tears spilling over. "I thought I would die there." Mr. Evans swallowed hard. "You're safe now," he said, voice choked. "I promise." In a swirl of red and blue lights, the ambulance pulled away, David inside. Mr. Evans stood in the cold as the police began their official procedures, roping off the area, taking photographs, checking the building. The wind howled across the empty lot. Eventually, one officer offered him a ride home, but he declined. Instead, he headed for his truck. He sat behind the wheel, shivering, teeth chattering from the adrenaline crash. He knew David was going to the hospital for immediate evaluation. He also knew that, with the man behind bars, David was at least temporarily out of danger. He closed his eyes, thinking of Amy and now David. Two children yanked from the abyss by chance and a little luck. But how many others were out there, trapped in these so-called foster homes that believed in torturing kids under the guise of spiritual cleansing? The darkness in Stratford ran deeper than he ever imagined. And though tonight's rescue felt like a victory, it was a small one in a larger war. He sighed, wiping at his eyes. Tomorrow, he would wake up, drive his bus, and see all those faces again. He had to keep watch. He had to be ready. Long after the sirens faded, he finally started the engine. The heater blasted tepid air against his numb fingers. As he turned onto the main road, he caught a glimpse of himself in the rearview mirror. His eyes, ringed with exhaustion and worry, reflected the truth. In that moment, his life had irrevocably changed. He was no longer just a bus driver. He had become a silent guardian, bearing witness to hidden atrocities that most people never see or choose not to see. And he couldn't unsee them now. He woke the next morning with knots in his shoulders and bruises on his arms where he'd slammed into boxes, but the memory of David's rescue gave him a glimmer of hope. At least one more child was safe. Still, he couldn't forget the man's deranged ravings. Ms. Morrow and others were involved. and the system's silence suggested that some larger operation was underway. When he arrived at the bus depot, a few coworkers, other drivers, mechanics, crowded around him. Word had spread that he'd gotten tangled in some late-night police matter. They wanted details. He shrugged them off with a vague explanation. Just helping a kid in trouble. A couple of them patted him on the back, congratulating him on his bravery. Others gave him wary looks, as if they weren't sure they wanted to know more. Over the next few days, more arrests made the local news. Several individuals in surrounding counties were taken into custody, all tied to allegations of abusing foster children under the guise of spiritual cleansing. Among the names released was Ms. Morrow. She'd been apprehended in a nighttime raid. Some of her so-called church associates were also rounded up. The charges ranged from child endangerment to aggravated assault. Mr. Evans followed these developments with a mixture of relief and sorrow. It sickened him to realize how many kids might have been harmed before the authorities took decisive action. He recalled Myra's warnings about hush-hush directives. It seemed the time for secrecy was over. The investigators had apparently gathered enough evidence to move in, culminating in a string of coordinated raids. For a moment, he allowed himself a faint smile, imagining Ms. Morrow led away in handcuffs. A few days later, he received a call from Myra at last. Her voice was brisk, but carried a note of satisfaction. "They got them," she said. "Morrow, her associates, that man who took David, they're all in custody. The state attorneys are building a strong case. It'll take time, but from what I hear, it's pretty damning." He exhaled a shaky breath. "So the kids are free? Those who were in immediate danger?" "Yes," Myra replied. "They're being placed in emergency care. David's in a hospital at the moment, recovering from malnourishment and injuries. Amy is safe in a different foster home, better vetted. She's doing okay, according to her caseworker." A wave of emotions surged through him, too tangled to name. Relief, triumph, heartbreak for all the suffering. "I'm glad," he managed. "You did the right thing, Evans. More than once. If you hadn't insisted, if you hadn't rescued that boy personally, who knows what would have happened." He couldn't find words to respond, so he merely said, "Thank you for letting me know." She paused. "I hope you can get some rest now. But I also hope you won't stop caring. We need more people like you." He hung up, tears prickling at the corners of his eyes. For a long moment, he stared at the old bus timetable pinned to his kitchen wall, the edges curling. He thought about Amy's note, hidden in his glove compartment, the crayon drawing of a bus and a girl smiling. Then he recalled David's trembling hand clutching his in that deserted lot, the boy's eyes filled with terror. The next morning, he climbed onto bus 41 as usual. The routine beep of the console felt surreal, as though nothing had changed. He started the engine, hearing the familiar rumble beneath his feet. One by one, children boarded, chatting, laughing, some still sleepy. He watched them carefully, as he always had, and he wondered which of them might be carrying a hidden hurt. Perhaps none. Perhaps some. Regardless, he had learned that vigilance mattered. A simple question, "Are you okay?" could be the difference between life and death. He glanced at the dashboard clock. 6:45, time to turn on the heater. As warm air flowed through the vents, he pictured that metal unit where Amy had slept, and the battered barn that had held David captive. He remembered the horrifying notion of heat used as a weapon, twisted into some warped ritual. It felt strangely cathartic to be behind the wheel again, letting the bus's heater radiate gentle warmth. Here, it was safe, welcoming, and real, not the cruel parody those abusers had invented. The kids laughed about some meme or challenge going around. He let them have their moment, relieved that, for these children, morning meant an ordinary day at school. And if ever it stopped being ordinary, he resolved to notice. He wouldn't shrink from asking questions, even when it was inconvenient or uncomfortable. He'd gather evidence if needed. He'd push bureaucracies that moved at a glacial pace. He had changed, and he couldn't pretend otherwise. That was the last bitter winter he spent in ignorance. From that point on, he remained a silent watcher, an ordinary bus driver with an extraordinary dedication to protecting the most vulnerable souls in his path. In the months ahead, he occasionally got updates through Myra. Amy was adjusting well, though she still struggled with trust. David's physical wounds were healing, and a kind new foster family was trying to mend his fragile spirit. The broader operation that Ms. Morrow and her associates ran crumbled in the glare of legal consequences. The media reported the convictions, the sentencing. People shook their heads, outraged, and insisted they never suspected such evil could hide in their quiet town. Mr. Evans never asked for recognition. He avoided reporters, politely declining to talk about what he had done. His reward was knowing that 2 children, and possibly more, had been spared from unspeakable cruelty. He still had nightmares sometimes, jolting awake with the image of a wooden rod raised in the shadows, or of a space heater's coils glowing in the dark. But each morning, he drove the bus, greeting every child with as much warmth as the old heater could muster, hoping that quiet kindness might shield them from life's harshest blows. On a brisk day near the end of the school year, he opened his glove compartment to fetch a parking permit, and spotted Amy's folded note. He stared at it for a moment. This heater never hurt me, and felt a surge of purpose. Small gestures, small mercies, they could change a life, even when the world was harsh and indifferent. A single person noticing, a single person acting, could tilt the balance. He gently closed the glove compartment, turned the key, and guided Bus 41 onto the familiar route. The road stretched ahead, the same routine he had followed for years. But everything felt different now. Beneath the stillness of those suburban streets, he knew there lurked countless stories. Some bleak, some hopeful, and he could no longer pretend they were none of his concern. He had chosen to be involved, to protect the children who couldn't protect themselves. No going back. And so he drove on, shoulders set, eyes alert, determined to keep watch for any sign of a child in need, trusting that kindness and vigilance could be a shield stronger than any locked door or twisted belief. The bus rumbled forward, its heater humming softly, and he carried that quiet resolve in his heart until his route was done. Thanks for listening till the end. If you found this story moving, give it a like and consider subscribing for more.